everybody. Thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate you taking time on your Friday evening. My name is Cecilia Rubino. I'm the director of the theater program at Lang College. And it was just such a privilege to collaborate with Tanya Kalmanovitch and this incredible cast and crew. The cast getting their cuts yesterday. We've been working media cues all day. I really want to welcome you and partner with you because this is a workshop. You're going to see actors with text in hand. This is a piece that's come together fast and furiously. But we're interested in you are our partner in terms of figuring out what did you understand, what else do you need in terms of story, image, and inside your handy program is a comments sheet, which we hope that you might take a minute to write some comments afterwards. So again, it's a workshop, and the second thing is that it's a documentary theater piece with music. All the words that you'll hear tonight are people that Tanya met in her travels in northern Alberta, or they come from the public record or from newspapers, and they're brought to life by these intrepid, lovely actors. And the last thing is we'd really like to thank Nth Degree at the New School and the Tishman Environment and Design Center. And it is my honor to introduce the Dean of Milano and the Director of the Center, Michel DePass, who's been a champion of this piece from the start, so we can't thank you enough.
It is really my honor. Thank you very much for the introduction. So Tanya is a shining star. She is the shining star of the Tishman Environment and Design Center. She is one of our very first affiliated faculty, and she was a featured panelist at our Earth Day event in 2015. And on that panel, she was asked to describe the connections between music and social movements. And here's a taste of what she said. Music is a bold technology that is enormously effective at making feelings, emotions, memories, and complex arrays of culture sensible, palpable, and workable. I was reminded just yesterday that it was on that night 2.5 years ago that the very first flickers of the idea of the Tar Sands Songbook came to light when Tanya started thinking about growing up in Fort McMurray. And she said, I wanted to be a musician because it had nothing to do with oil. Cut to a little over a year later, and we put a call out from the Tishman Center for faculty to apply for grants to support interdisciplinary opportunities, community-based climate justice research projects. And awarding a grant to Tanya was really a no-brainer. She proposed returning to Fort McMurray to document the experience of her friends, including her community, which she would translate into music. She thought then that she would be writing a book. At the Tishman Center, we were in love with the idea from the start. And we have loved working with Tanya and watching this amazing project grow and evolve. Using the bold technology of music into the performance we are all about to witness. I have been a part of the environment and climate movement for over 2 decades. And tonight's performance really is what I call an opportunity to not overdevelop our brains, but to develop our heart. And that is the place and space where we really need to go if we are going to solve any of these issues that we are all forced with every single day to grapple with. And Tanya brings a very unique and wonderful and generous perspective, having grown up and having to think about this from a livelihoods perspective and also embrace it in terms of what is our future as we really think about oil, fossil fuels, and where are we going. So thank you, Tanya, for giving all of us, on behalf of everybody here who's with the Tishman Environment and Design Center, thank you for giving us an opportunity to be a small part of this incredible experience. Congratulations.
You can't see much from Highway 63, but you take the exit for Suncor, and as you come down into the plant sites, the first thing you see, the tailings ponds. And that is the most disgusting looking soup sludge, you know? It's massive, maybe 10 times the size of a soccer field. And on the pond you see these human dummies standing guard, scarecrows, scare ducks. And then you hear the air cannons. Poof! Poof! Every 10 seconds or so, poof! And of course I asked right away, what's that all about? It was explained to me, well, that's to keep the birds from landing on the ponds. Because if the birds land there, they die. And as you come down into the plant site, you got this huge coker, 40 stories high. The scope and the scale up there just blows your mind. And they hand you a shovel and say, go do this, or give you the keys to a truck and say, go haul this, and then you're part of the machinery, right?
That's my friend Sheldon. We met a year ago, last summer, at Gregoire Lake, just south of Fort McMurray. It's kind of a funny story how we met. I'd come up for the healing gathering at the Fort McMurray First Nation territory. Now, Cleo was the one who organized it, and at that point, we weren't friends yet. She was somebody I'd met on Facebook. Anyway, although I was born in Fort McMurray, I didn't know anyone up there. And that first night, there were just a few of us at the camp. It was raining, and everybody gathered in this big white tent with the tables and the lanterns. And there was this guy singing, playing the guitar. And I thought, I should go get my fiddle. I mean, that's why I brought it, right? So I could meet people. So I wait for him to finish the song, and I go up to him and I say, hey, sounds like you could use a fiddle. And he just says,
Yeah, right.
I can't believe it. I mean, it's like, did I come all the way back to Alberta just to be vibed by some guy, like playing tragically hip covers? See, some of you have heard of the hip. It's a Canadian thing. So anyway, I walk away, and then I think, wait a minute. I played in bands with guys like that for years. I mean, I'm a professional musician. So I go back to my tent, I get the fiddle, and I walk back through the rain, and I take the fiddle out, and I sit down, and I start to play along. And as I'm playing, Sheldon gets this look, like he's gonna cry. And we finish the song, and the tears are just streaming down his face. And he looks at me and he says, where did you come from? Now, for most of my life, if somebody asked me where I was from, I didn't have an easy answer. I mean, Fort McMurray wasn't on the map. Even when I was a kid, you know those pull-down maps they'd have on the classroom wall? Well, they used to cut off right above Edmonton. So I never talked about being from Fort McMurray. It was the middle of nowhere. And besides, there was always this sense that nothing important could come from Alberta. But a few years ago, Fort McMurray became front page news, and gradually, I noticed that I didn't have to explain where I was from. I could just say Tar Sands, or Keystone XL, and not only did people know where it was, it's like they had opinions about it. It's like this guy I met who'd gone up to Fort McMurray because he wanted to see ground zero for climate change. Fort McMurray is where I was born. It's where my dad's Esso station was. My stepfather was an engineer for Suncor. It's where my mother heard a symphony orchestra for the first time. It's the place that convened the people who shaped my life.
These are images of open pit mining near Fort McMurray. What's being extracted is oil sand, a mix of quartz sand, clay, water, and heavy hydrocarbons known as bitumen that's refined into unconventional crude oil. Now, 50 years ago, the Great Canadian Oil Sands Company launched a trailblazing experiment, unlocking the third largest oil deposit in the world. Over time, it transformed Canada into a world energy leader, and it also transformed vast areas of public land into an industrialized landscape. Normally, oil flows out of the ground and invisibly into our lives. But oil sands mining, unlike drilling, makes the process of extraction visible on an epic scale. First, layers of trees, bushes, grass, soil, and rocks, collectively known as the overburden, are scraped away. The oil sands are scooped up by enormous shovels. They're dumped into tanks of hot water and washed and spun so that the bitumen can be separated and siphoned away. The water used in the separation process is too contaminated to be returned to the river. It's stored in vast lakes known as tailings ponds.
You look around right now and what you see, this flat, black, loamy muskeg that goes on for miles and miles and miles and miles. I mean, I'm no geologist, you know. But underneath this is all the energy of the sun that was absorbed by living things. You see, when I look at this terrain, I see muskeg tea. I see blueberries. I see tobacco. I see all these medicines that we use, the rat root. I see our sustenance. I see our ability as indigenous people to be able to survive for thousands of years. This landscape contains our connection to the earth, you know. But if you look at it as a developer, you say, I can't build on this shit. If you look at it as a pulp and paper guy, you say, oh, there's no marketable resource here. Nothing of any value except the death that lies beneath. And then you take that death, that oil, and you bring it out and give it new life. I mean, shit, we're driving in an example of it. We're wearing examples of it, you know?
Now, even before I'd started, my project made the news. This is my friend Roger Levesque. He interviewed me for the Edmonton Journal.
Sometimes you have to go somewhere far away to understand where you came from. Just ask Tanya Kalmanovitch. In recent years, the musician, ethnomusicologist, author, and teacher, who was born in Fort McMurray, found herself in places like Afghanistan, India, or at home in New York, often recalling her Alberta upbringing, thinking about how her life has been tied to issues like oil and climate change. All this will take greater focus as Kalmanovitch returns to northern Alberta this summer on a creative mission to seek out stories and views tied to living in the oil patch, to society's reliance on oil and its role in our everyday lives.
This was also my first experience with internet trolling.
The name of the book suggests she's planning to take a dump on her hometown.
Tar sand? Where the hell does she live? No tar sands on this planet.
Woo, when I read the lead for this article, I thought, oh no, not another misinformed Neil Young environmental artist want to be hit on the oil sands.
You lost me when you called it tar sands.
Climate change is a hoax, which serves no purpose except to consolidate power in the hands of the government and fleece the public out of their hard-earned money.
Look, when I was a kid, everybody called them tar sands. It was tar sands or oil sands, either way. People don't seem to remember that now. Now, in the 90s, industry rebranded the oil sands. So now the word you choose shows where you stand. Oil sounds neutral, useful, natural. That's what industry says. Environmentalists say tar, sticky, dirty, dangerous. It's just a 3-letter word, but it makes a difference. Welcome to Fort McMurray. This is a classic boomtown. Its population is linked to the price of oil. In 1966, the year before the Great Canadian Oil Sands plant opened, its population was 2,461. In 1971, the year after I was born, the population had almost tripled in size. And in 2016, the year I first went back, the population was about 88,000 people. Now, to get here, you fly to Edmonton. That's the northernmost metropolis in North America. And you take another a short commercial flight north. But I always drive. I like to drive north. It feels good. There's a sky there that I've never seen anywhere else. But for a lot of my Canadian friends, Fort McMurray doesn't really exist, except for oil.
I think most people in Alberta don't think there's anything up there. I mean, just forest and this place where sometimes people go to make money.
I made it a point never to associate with people who work in oil.
In Fort McMurray, almost everyone is a new arrival. Now, some people embrace the town. They settle in, they buy property, they raise families. But temporary fly-in, fly-out workers live in camps, and every few weeks, they go to someplace else that they call home.
It doesn't matter if you were born and raised here or moved here. Everyone stays for the money.
I'm not gonna lie, it kills me. Hearing people always trash my hometown. I mean, don't complain. Coming to a city where you can make legit $2,500 a week, you know?
There isn't anything else in Fort Mac besides the black gold.
Anyway, people just can't seem to agree about Fort McMurray.
Although perhaps best known as the heart of the oil sands, we're one of Canada's largest municipalities.
The notorious Alberta Tar Sands is a parched gray
extending
desert
over
stretched to the horizon.
66,000 square kilometers.
Mountains of waste so large,
North
workers
Central
joke that they have their
Alberta.
own weather system.
This is a community where people from
Tailings
all over the
ponds
world
so
come
vast that they are
in
visible
search
from
of
space.
unparalleled economic
The second largest dam in the world,
opportunities
built to contain that
and
toxic
find
water.
a strong, resilient community.
The earth, skinned alive.
I wanted to find the people who remembered Fort McMurray before oil. So I sat down with two people who knew my family before I was born.
Before we begin, I need to be very clear with you. Over the years, Fort McMurray has gotten a bad rap in the media. And the very fact that people call it Fort Mac to us is degrading. It's as if we were only here for the money.
Fort Mac is wrong. My family goes back to 1922. It's only the newcomers really that are saying that. It's wrong.
And some people even call it Fort McMoney. No, we have a good life here, and families come, and they come from all over Canada and all over the world. There are good people in this town. Fort McMurray has been good to so many people.
You don't make a Mac.
And I wanted to sit with people who didn't have to move to Fort McMurray because it was already their home.
Well, I'm 65 years old. And industry is not 65 years old, so I saw the changes from the start. When I think back, I never thought there would be such a drastic change. I was 13 years old when I went to Fort McMurray by boat. GCOS was just starting to clear the land. I remember them taking down these big, beautiful, white spruce, just towers of it. Did I ever think it would be like this? And then everything just sort of went down. And it's been going down ever since. We don't go out to Jackfish Lake anymore. I mean, Jackfish is where I grew up. It had everything we needed. Sometimes when the whitefish was really good, we would move to the lake and stay in a tent and just pick berries and make dry fish and dry meat. And evenings my dad would go hunting for moose or a bear. It was a good life, you know. It was the best. And industry will come to Fort Chip, you know. We tell them all our problems. I'm sure they've heard it over and over. And we keep saying, come with us, we'll show you. They never come out with us. I want to show them Jackfish Lake. We have a cemetery there. That's where I'm going to bury my husband and my son next month, on that hill, where a lot of my ancestors are buried.
That's Alice. When a friend of mine found out I was going to Fort Chipewyan, she said, "You'll meet her. All roads lead to Alice." Fort Chipewyan is a small indigenous community downriver from the mining operations. Now, downriver in this case is further north, and there's only one road there. It's a winter road. In the summer, you get there by boat or by plane. I flew, and I'd never seen anything like it. It's all tones of green, muskeg and wetlands and ribbons of rivers. And this fishing village perched on the shore of Lake Athabasca. Now, to get to Alice's house, you walk east along the shore and you find the driveway opposite the monument. You walk up past her garden. Hollyhocks, radishes, sunflowers, peas, tomatoes, carrots, hot peppers. You find her sitting on the front porch in the warm afternoon light with her dog Toby at her feet. She speaks quietly and clearly about the things that have changed. She speaks about oil. My mother, on the other hand, never spoke to me about oil, at least not until I started to ask.
I can remember growing up in Manitoba, in Asheville Junction, just up on the hill, hearing all about the oil in Alberta. You know, way back then, I'm 74, and I'm talking about as a little kid, hearing about the boom in Alberta. And my Uncle Tom worked on the oil rigs in Pincher Creek. When he died, he left us some money, and I got $100. No, it was $90 because I had to pay the lawyer $10. And that was what enabled me to get my foot in the door at teacher's college. But I remember people saying, boy, oh boy, if only they'd find oil on your land, you'd be rich. And the movies about oil in Texas. Oh, and it was a very big deal to scrape up the money to go see a movie in Dauphin. Tickets were 50 cents, and we were poor. My sister Patty and I call it the 5 O's poor. And now look at all the things we have. I mean, it's not enough to have one TV. You have to have one for every room. I mean, do we really need all this stuff? But that's the way people have been programmed. I was programmed to honor the land because it was our livelihood. It was the difference between starving and staying alive.
The Great Canadian Oil Sands Company officially opened its plant in September 1967. That makes me just about the same age as industry. And the way I remember it, the future was going to bring us great things. Oil was always about more than money. It was about promises.
Please welcome the Premier of Alberta, Ernst Manning.
Beneath and behind every worthwhile industrial project, there should always be a worthwhile purpose. With this in mind, it is fitting that we dedicate this plant not merely to the production of oil, but to the continual progress and enrichment of mankind. To this end, I now declare this great Canadian oil sands complex officially open!
And my father wanted to stake his claim. He moved his young family from one northern outpost to the other. My mother would put it this way.
Tanya, you have to understand what this opportunity meant to us. Coming from Thompson, well, I mean, it was a fresh start. The company was making offers to young people. We had an interest-free mortgage on a brand new house. It was quite lovely, split level. I was so far away from my family, but there were people in town that became my support system. Father Turcotte, of course, and Sister Agnes, of course. Walter Hill at Hill's Drugs. I think his family went back as far as the fur trade. Marion Clark, across the street. We were good friends. She'd grown up in Edmonton, and she used to go to the opera. I had one record, which I bought in Thompson with my own money. I think it was Mario Lanza. I'm embarrassed to say. But I thought he was the most wonderful singer. And Marion gave one of her Marion laughs, and she said, well, no, not really. And she told me about Saturday afternoon at the opera on CBC, and I'll never forget. There was an orchestra that came to Fort McMurray. They played in the school gym. I thought it was the most sophisticated and wonderful thing in the world. You know, there was a degree of thinking that the company knew best. That because they were providing employment and raising our standard of living, we tended to give the companies a pass. I mean, don't forget, if it wasn't for that oil money, we'd still be in shitty Thompson.
Well, 50 years later, some people still talk about their work in the oil sands with that same sense of promise.
The biggest trucks in the world. I love it. I love the sound of the trucks, the sound of whistles, of everything about it.
I often say to people, this is the Silicon Valley of the North. If you want to be an engineer,
talks about the work differently.
You know, my son works there, and I keep saying, you don't need to work there, Brian. You have the smarts to go back to school.
Mom, I'm 40.
You're still young. You can still go into something else. But the money's good. I've seen the money. I have cousins in Fort McMurray that have made their millions from setting up the right business with industry. It's a really hard debate, you know? Because what are you going to do? I mean, what is there out there now that's not untouched by industry? I mean, there's a lot of people here that say, we have to work, you know, we've got families to think of. Industries become the new trap line. That's what I call it. Because, I mean, our young, that's where they go. Because they can have all the toys they want now. They have the fastest trucks, the newest, latest technology, iPhones, oh man, Sea-Doos, you name it, snowmobiles, quads.
Before the boom, before the expose articles and the Facebook memes, before Leonardo DiCaprio and Jane Fonda flew in, the oil sands were private, unprofitable. A kind of avant-garde engineering experiment meets northern adventure. And maybe that's why there's some defensiveness around the issue. I found the Oil Sands Oral History Archive at the Glenbow Museum at Calgary. I recognize some of the names. Here's a retired superintendent of operations. He still gets excited about the things he discovered in the oil sands. Prehistoric wood preserved in oil and a seam of 400-million-year-old ice.
The oil sands fascinate me. And most people that work for any length of time as operations people are the same. For people that fly in from Newfoundland and work there as a pipe fitter and a millwright, and they see smoke and ponds and go back and say, oh, it's a horrible place. But when you're involved in operations like I was, it's a special thing. And believe it or not, the oil sands, it's a wonder of the world.
Here's a couple now in their 80s. They finish each other's sentences.
When we arrived in Fort McMurray, it was September 1966.
The road into Fort McMurray was a sea of mud. When our daughter was born, she was the 10th baby born in that hospital.
It was intensely exciting.
It was tough. And I think we were tough because we didn't complain. All our friends were in the same boat. That was the other thing. We were all together in this. No matter what our jobs were, we played bridge together. And it was fun.
It was oil, as much as music, that gave me my first taste of a bigger world. I remember dinner parties with these exotic foods. There was a dessert, an Indian dessert, with real gold leaf on top. A 7-layer cake with frosting like calligraphy. Music, elaborate stories, exuberant jokes. And people from all over the world, displaced to an isolated Canadian frontier. My mother remembers some of their names.
The Srinivassans, the Krakowskis, the Beals, Erdl Yildirim. You might remember him, because he came over one winter, you came home from Juilliard, and he was eyeing you up because he liked younger
And here's
women.
Mike Supple, the man who made the oil sands profitable.
The start of my story in the mid-70s had to be the mid-80s, for we were firmly in a profitable situation. When I first took over, it was costing us something like $30 a barrel. Eventually, we got down to about $15 a barrel. Oil prices had come up to 15 by then, so finally, we turned the corner.
Working in the mines can transform ordinary people into champions. I was saying to Sheldon, you know, it's like they give you the keys to the biggest Tonka truck in the world.
That's exactly what my foreman said. First day of the job, he said, we get the biggest Tonka trucks and the biggest sandbox in the world. And that's what this place gives you every day. You get to be a hero. But I was scared too. Like when I got into Millennium Camp that first day and I laid in bed that night and I heard those boomers, boof, every 2 minutes, right? Boof. Like what the hell was that? Took me a while to get acclimatized. And then I'm up in the mine and you can feel it and see it, you know, this landscape that I'm talking about in which, see, my family, my history, my story is a woodland Cree. We're stripping it away out there, you know, actually peeling back the layers of Mother Earth with our shovels. Ah, and don't you see it? It's like when you're there and you're right in the thick of it. Good God, you become numb.
When I want to understand something, I order books. Check this one out. It's an ethnography of oil culture in Trinidad. And the author writes that hydrocarbons seem both invisible and inevitable. One notices them only when something goes wrong. Like when there's a pipeline spill. But when everything works properly, oil goes from the ground and into your gas tank. And from there, the pollution escapes everywhere without notice. He calls this kind of pollution the spill everywhere. So oil, in other words, is most dangerous when it behaves ordinarily. That is neither moral nor immoral, but amoral. Now, back in the 1940s, Buckminster Fuller coined the term energy slaves. It's a way of understanding the energy we use in units of human labor. And it turns out that the average North American lifestyle today would require the equivalent of about 250 human slaves. I'd never thought of it that way before. I don't even have a first memory of oil. You know, growing up was everywhere and nowhere. I mean, for a time we lived in a house in a neighborhood called Petrolia. Our local hero was Wayne Gretzky of the Edmonton Oilers. The McDonald's had a pump jack in the playground. I didn't notice oil because it was normal. A road trip.
A hot shower after the road trip.
The road itself.
Lipstick.
Shaving cream, toothpaste.
Shampoo, conditioner,
Eyeglasses and contacts.
Anesthetics, antihistamines, aspirin.
Vaseline, Band-Aids.
Toothbrushes, gum, water bottles.
Soccer balls, basketballs, tennis rackets, hockey clubs.
Bicycle tires, life jackets, Gore-Tex.
Scotch tape, garbage bags.
Toilet seats, toilet plungers, shower curtains.
Preservatives, ballpoint pens.
CDs, LPs, and cassettes.
iPhones, laptops, desktops.
Plastic. It's everywhere.
Thank you, Frank. So the first question that people ask me when they find out I do this is, what's the difference between a fiddle and a violin? So we're going to get that out of the way. There's no difference. It's the same instrument. It's just the way you play it. And a question I get a lot back home is, can you play the Red River Jig? All my life. My uncles, my cousins, especially the people I met when I went back north. Even my mother said.
Well, what do you expect, Tanya? Of course you need to know the Red River Jig.
So I decided to learn it. And one of the first things you need to know about the Red River Jig is that it's not a jig. It's more of a reel. And it's a dance, jigging. It's part Indigenous, part Scottish, part Quebecois. Some people call it the Métis national anthem. And I learned that you have to tune the G string, this low one, up a whole step, like this. This is really hard to do in public. Right? And that way, it makes the whole instrument resonate, and then you can get to this lower part a little bit more easily, right? But the thing is, it doesn't really matter how well you play the violin. And you know, I wanted to play the violin. I wanted to play classical music. I wanted to play classical music because it was difficult and beautiful, because it gave me a sense of the world outside of Alberta, and mainly because I could do it all on my own. I mean, to play classical music, all you have to do, really, is find a decent teacher and do what they tell you to do. You go home after school, you go to your room, you shut the door, you take the violin out of the case, and literally, you do exactly what they tell you to do. You go through Suzuki Book 1, to Book 2, to Book 3, to Book 4. You go from group lessons to private, and you go from the teacher near your house to the teacher you have to take 2 buses to get to. You go from local to provincial to national competitions, and from national to international festivals, and the more you do it, the stronger you get. You get stronger and stronger and stronger, and you get out. I went from group lessons at age 3, to Carnegie Hall at age 16, to Juilliard at 17. I didn't think that the Red River Jig was going to get me there. to Alberta because I wanted to see it for myself. In 2012, Hurricane Sandy turned my Brooklyn neighborhood into a disaster zone overnight. I spent the first week hauling debris out of my neighbor's house. We'd pile it up on the sidewalk, and these tourists would come by on their bikes and they'd take pictures. And they'd say like, hey, grab a pair of gloves, get a contractor bag, there's plenty to do. And they'd just give me this sort of nervous smile and move on. Now that guy who described Fort McMurray as ground zero for climate change, he told me about the tailings ponds. He said they were black holes, lifeless voids. Birds landed on them and died, hundreds of birds falling from the sky. I wanted to see it for myself, but not from the outside. Because, well, here's a voice from the archives.
When somebody goes in overnight and they see the ponds and they say, holy Christ, what have we got going on here? Well, if they understood exactly what's going on and didn't listen to all the untruths being published by the activists.
And I wanted to separate the truths from the untruths. I'm sitting in my rental car on the side of Highway 63 at the edge of a tailings pond. I expected to see a steaming cauldron, but all I see is a vast, flat, sad lake. But what kind of a lake needs a chain link fence? And cannons? These soft, plosive pops in the distance every few seconds until one fires close to me and it's like a gun going off next to my head. There's vehicles going by 24 hours a day. Pickup trucks with buggy whips, gravel trucks, tankers, shift buses, and in between, you could hear it floating in. This eerie sound, like a rhythmic shriek. It took me a while to realize that it's the sound of a bird's distress call on a loop. You know, I sat by the side of that pond for a long time that first night, listening to that counterpoint of explosions. The explosions and the shrieks are part of this elaborate automated system to keep birds from landing on the water. They have to keep changing the pattern because if they don't, the birds get used to it and they come to ignore the empty threat. It's a behavior called habituation. Now, all forms of mining produce tailings. It isn't something specific to the oil sands. But what's in there? Here's what the Suncor website says.
Oil sands tailings are the remaining sand, water, clay, silt, and residual hydrocarbons left after the majority of the hydrocarbons are recovered from the oil sands during our water-based extraction process.
The Pembina Institute is an independent research organization. They give a little more detail.
The slurry sieved from the mining process is deposited as waste in enormous holding lakes, and they contain a host of toxic materials including bitumen, naphthenic acids, cyanide, phenols, arsenic, cadmium, chromium, copper, lead, and zinc.
The author of this book took a tour of the oil sands.
The guide on Suncor's energy tour offered us a parable. We remove everything, clean up the oil spill which nature left us, and put everything back. And an analogy. The tailings are coffee grounds left over from the process of making bitumen into oil.
I spent a lot of time sitting next to the ponds. I wanted to take it all in, to let the reality of the place sink into me. And the longer I stayed there, the more I started to feel that there was something dangerous in what I was doing, just being there. I mean, it's not like there's anywhere I could go. There's chain link fences and no trespassing signs everywhere, but I was always alone. And one night, I was recording a soundscape by the side of the road when I heard a motorcycle pull up, and my heart was just pounding. But it was just a guy checking to see if I'd broken down. But another night, I was on the east side of the Syncrude Loop when I heard this high-pitched whine in my headphones. I look up, and I see 3 security trucks and 3 young women in uniforms and work boots, and I could hear the crackle of their walkie-talkies. They wanted to know what I was taking pictures of and why, and what else I'd photographed. They wanted me to tell them my name and where I was from and who I was working for. They told me it was private property. I said I thought it was a provincial highway. They kept asking for my name until I said, look, am I in trouble? Because if not, I'd rather just pack up and be on my way. They said it wasn't safe for me to be there. So what is the nature of the risk? This friend of mine is an engineer. He thinks risk is knowable.
As an engineer, I have to believe that every problem has a set of solutions. You think about risk as an unknown quantity, so it scares you, but we think risk is measurable and manageable. We can eliminate it or we can move it to an acceptable level. There's something called the risk matrix. You can Google it. Basically, it's a grid with severity on one axis and probability on the other. And our job is to move things from the red zone into the orange and green zones.
This friend of mine does environmental work for oil companies. He thinks risk is concealed.
Well, before anybody gets in, the job site is notified and a whole bunch of employees are put together. We make like a tourist place for high-placed employees. We go build a site where only they can go. We remove all the ways that they can get into the bad places. I mean, it's a big stage out there. It's like a movie set. We prop it up, then as soon as they're gone, we replace everything and start over again. And for regulators, we do the same thing. And it's just, well, I don't know. Everything out there is made up.
This friend thinks I should question what my other two friends have to say.
One thing I always tell people is that if you speak to anyone up there and they tell you something, even if it's me, treat me the same way. Ask yourself, why is this person telling me this? What does this person want me to believe? I mean, I hope I tell the truth, and I strive really hard to tell nothing but the truth. I mean, it's, you know, it's sometimes the truth is just told in different ways.
The National Safety Council is pleased to present the 2013 Green Cross for Safety Medal to ExxonMobil Corporation. Please welcome ExxonMobil Chairman and CEO Rex W. Tillerson.
Following the Valdez oil spill in 1990, which had a profound impact on Exxon, we set out to transform the company in the way we manage risks. Not only the risks of safety, but the risks of all of our facilities, our people, and the environment. And to put that at the center of all we do. Risk management and safety will no longer be viewed as priorities, but as core values. Our vision, a workplace where nobody gets hurt.
ExxonMobil hurt-based levels.
0. No physical body damage, but actionable learnings.
1. Minor hurt.
2. Moderate hurt.
3. Severe hurt.
4. Fatality.
5. Multiple fatalities.
Now, safety culture is practically a religion in industry. But is all risk physical risk?
As the old joke goes, you can hardly take a piss without getting safety training first.
Well, the only reason they care about safety is that it costs them more to train someone to replace you.
It takes a certain kind of wacko to work in the patch. I mean, that's how people get hurt. That's how people die. They try to do something they are totally unsuited for. But they all want that big money.
I got 16 projects on the go, running around the clock. I've been up here for 73 days. Before you get all like, whoa, you can't do that. I'm part owner of the company, so I can do anything I want, right?
The money is great, but you earn every cent. The work takes its toll. It's rough conditions in remote places. It's not seeing your family.
I live in Red Deer. Okay, I own a house in Red Deer. Let me put it this way. I vacation in Red Deer when I get a chance. My kids, we have an extensive relationship on the phone. We talk and all that. It sucks. It sucks. But they want for nothing. Well, they probably wanted a dad, but they've gotten used to it.
It's no surprise. These guys don't come back the same people.
One thing I'll tell you for sure, though, is that the industry is there for one purpose and one purpose only, to make money as quickly and as efficiently as they can. And if you don't believe that, well then, there's something wrong with you.
Back in the Glenbow archives now, with those oral histories. Here's an interview with Mike Supple. I remember his name from grown-up conversations at dinners. And here's Bert McKay. He talks about my stepfather fondly. He calls him Ernie in the transcript. And in separate interviews, both men remember the same event. Here's Mike Supple speaking to the interviewer from his home.
I'll show you my office upstairs. You can see lots of boat pictures of all my boats from my whole life. I'm a great shipshape guy. Can't have the workplace clean and shipshape, then you can have injuries. We had some really tough learning processes up there. Remember one cold night, minus 30, minus 40, whatever it was. We were doing some maintenance on a bucket wheel on the night shift, and they put up some scaffolding and big sheets of canvas to keep the heat in while they were working on these replacement teeth.
Now here's how Bert McKay remembers it.
And what happened was that a gentleman was working, welding on a bucket wheel, and another gentleman was higher up and getting ready to paint and to avoid rust, and he was using toluene, and it fell onto the gentleman who was welding. And I won't go into the details, but I was on the shift that day and I will never forget it.
Mike.
And he just dumped right on the welder who was sparking away up there, of course, and he just burned to death. And that was somebody not cleaning up at the end of the shift. So I had to do a heck of a lot of implementation of discipline. Good safety gives you good productivity.
Bert.
You know, the nightmares I've had about what happened to that gentleman, and it was simply a lack of communication. So we did do a lot in terms of safety, and today, the oil sands industry, it's the safest in Canada. It is the safest industry in Canada. There's no doubt about it.
You know, I'd read the articles about rare cancers in Fort Chipewyan. And based on what I read, I thought I'd see people walking down the streets with bald heads, clinging to IV poles. I thought everybody would be talking about it. But the damage isn't always visible. And not everybody wants to talk about it. And not everybody agrees about what's going on.
Days when we just used to scoop our cup from the rivers.
And you're gonna hear a lot of, I used to be able to take my cup and dip it in the river. Well, you know what? You should never have been drinking that water anyway. You should boil it. Because where does the beaver poop? Where does the fish poop? Where does the duck poop?
the ducks died, you know, those thousands of ducks, we had Suncor up here and they could not even finish their presentation. And it set off a panic where some mothers were using bottled water to wash their babies.
They closed the fishery in 2014. I wanted to make 60 years.
But you know, that's not directed to development. That's directed mostly to overharvesting.
That's bullshit. That's because no one's going to buy deformed fish that are toxic.
The province of Alberta just released this app. It's called Should I Eat This Fish?
So what happens in court is that they bring in one scientist who says, well, there is oil naturally occurring in the river because of the bituminous deposits.
Well, that's because the oil-eating bacteria were developed over 400 million years.
Because that oil's been leaking into that river.
For 400 million years.
For years and years and years and years before this.
But how can you prove how much of this is naturally occurring and how much was emitted by which project at which time?
Impossible.
Each oil company has their own process, and they're all copyrighted. They tested the river, and they say it's easy to tell where the contamination is coming from. Those hydrocarbon molecules in the river might as well have corporate logos on them.
I wanted to answer a simple question. Is toxic water leaking from the tailings ponds or not? So I looked at a report from the Pembina Institute.
The accumulation of more than 1 trillion liters of fluid oil sands tailings in North Alberta is a result of 5 decades of negligence and engineering failures. Estimates for the cost of cleanup range from 24 to 44 to $100 billion.
Wait a minute, a billion? A trillion? I can't even wrap my head around these numbers. So I learned a couple of strategies to relate to big numbers. One is to pit a big number to a concept you use in everyday life. Let's use time. Okay, a second is 1 second, right? A million seconds is 12 days. A billion seconds is 31 years. A trillion seconds, 31,688 years. Here's another strategy. Shrink big numbers down to the level of your own life. I read that Rex Tillerson's salary when he was CEO of Exxon was $100,000 a day. That's $36.5 million a year. And let's say that you make $50,000 a year. So Rex makes 730 times more than you. So your $15 bottle of wine only costs him 2 cents. Your $1,500 a month rent costs him $2.05. Anyway, back to Alice.
In the late 70s, when Suncor had that spill under the ice, and my brother Archie and I went out to jackfish by snowmobile, and my son was there. My son Keith, the one we just lost. My brothers and my dad, he taught him how to live off the land, so they're teaching him how to set a net under the ice with an auger. We had a good catch. And you know, to us, to catch a big white fish, there's nothing better. And then to split it open and cook it the traditional way. So Archie cleaned up the fish, made a fire, and the grease dripping from that fish was black from the oil spill. We couldn't see it in the fish. You know, the fish looked good. We had a taste of it, and it just tasted like oil. Even the dogs wouldn't eat it. Well, you know, we wouldn't have fed it to them. Fishing was shut down for 2 years, and Suncor got, I think, a $20,000 fine. And the fishermen never got compensated. For Suncor, it was just a slap on the wrist. Really showed you who the government prefers.
Over there, that's Big Ray Lattiser. Or not so Big Ray as he calls himself these days. He lost a little weight. And he was a trapper and a commercial fisherman until they closed the fishery down. Now to get to his house, you walk down Lutie Street until you see him waiting for you on the porch. You take your shoes off at the door, and he welcomes you into the kitchen. You sit down at a table covered in that familiar double layer of fabric and clear plastic. He tells you that his father was a fiddler too.
I commercially fished all my life, ever since I was a young boy. It's sad. You got pickerel with pushed-in faces, crooked tails, humpbacks, bulged-out eyes. Same with whitefish, you know. They're starting to get deformed. Northern pike, they're deformed. Now more trouts in Lake Athabasca, they're coming in over there, they're sick. They got big heads on them, skinny little bodies, you know. This was a healthy lake at one time. We're not going to leave anything for our grandchildren or great-grandchildren.
The ducks and geese. I mean, this year they don't even fly over. They used to fly over for weeks. The migration north, weeks. The big Canada geese first, then the swans, and then the wavies. All these things changing right in front of us. And yet, they're not doing anything about it fast enough.
We're losing lots, you know. We're losing bugs in the water, we're losing minnows. There used to be seagulls, thousands and thousands of them. Some of them totally disappeared. Those black-headed gulls, we still got those. But those other type of seagulls, those little black-gray gulls, they're gone now, totally gone. Mud hens, they call them, they're gone. And ducks, hardly any ducks around in our area. Son of a gun. As a trapper, I live amongst the animals, you know. And it's sad to start losing animals like that.
Around 2000, when industry was just really rolling, you know, at the community hall here, they have displays of Syncrude and Suncor and, oh boy, just all of the whole. But I went up to Syncrude and they had a banner that said 1 billion barrels of oil.
Wait, like the McDonald's sign?
I said to a guy, 1 billion barrels of oil. Well, how much water did it take to make that much oil? And he said, none. And I said, you know what? Your nose is growing. And he just turned red and I walked away from him. Because that's the attitude. That we're dumb, that we'll just roll over and let it happen. And if any one of those ponds goes and destroys everything, well, what are we going to do? Are we going to become refugees in our own land? I mean, go look at the cemetery and you'll see how many people have died. Rare cancers and lupus on the rise. Diabetes because of that change, moving off the land, eating processed foods. I mean, there's a study. They're presenting tomorrow. They say you shouldn't eat the gizzard of the ducks. You shouldn't eat the eggs. You shouldn't eat too much moose liver. You shouldn't eat the kidneys. You know, limit yourself.
There's so many people died of cancer in Fort Chip. This graveyard that we have here, out of 10, I believe there'd be 8 or 9 dead with cancer. My late cousin, him too. Oh boy, he didn't last long. 6 weeks he was dead of cancer. Doctor told him he had cancer. He had a birthday party after that. Just a few days, they took him out. And he went and died in Edmonton. Louis. He was a nice man. Yeah. A lot of changes, all right.
So a health study. A health study. We really need a health study. And we've been asking for it for years. Dr. O'Connell, who was our doctor, just about lost his license fighting our battle for us. I mean, industry will keep on going till the last drop of oil is gone. I wished so many times that this river flowed the other way. Would they feel the same way if the river was flowing past Edmonton? Because we're just 1,200 people here. Like, who gives a shit?
There's a lot of things that my family never talks about. And one of the conversations my mother and I had not yet had was the one about my stepbrother's death.
So we were living in Calgary at the time, and Philip had a summer job in Edmonton, but it didn't pay very much. And he begged his dad, he pleaded with him to see if he could find him a job in Fort McMurray, because that's where you could make more money. So Ernst found him a job, and that was the summer that Princess Diana and Prince Charles were married. Philip got a job with Vince Clark's company. And Vince Clark's company was contracted by Suncor. And what happened was, they were flushing out the line, and it exploded. In other words, it just came apart. And Philip yelled out and for Matt Mullen to duck, and Matt ducked, and it hit Philip. So that day, we heard about it. Well, the night before, I had been up all night watching the royal wedding. And that afternoon, the CEO of the plant called and asked to speak to Ernst and told him that Philip died. Instant impact. And Ernst was... Well, I'll never forget how it was sadness for all of us.
Tanya Kalmanovitch, 23, was the fatal victim of oil plant subcontract work last week. The Edmonton man was working with 42-year-old McMurrayite Matthew Mullen, who suffered a broken leg and arm during Wednesday's accident. The two men were employees of Clark Technological Services, a firm contracted to change a section of plastic pipelines in Suncor's tailings pond.
Somebody had to tell Philip's mother, Joyce. Well, I was the one who had to phone because Ernest asked me to. And I phoned her, and I said, Joyce, you may not want to talk to me, but I have some sad news for you. I told her Philip is gone. And she yelled, and the phone went out of her hand. You know, Ernest was really affected by that death. There was an investigation. It was done by the company, and of course it was the particular pipe. It was plastic pipe, I think, an industrial strength, but there was a fault in it, I guess. But Suncor did an investigation. I'm pretty sure they did. And there was no fault. There might have been a report, but I didn't see it. Ernest might have seen it, but he would have wanted to put it behind him, because Ernest, the emotional angst, would have stayed with him forever. It was like when we went to Auschwitz in Poland, and he would not go in. He stayed at the gate. He said he couldn't bear to go. And of course, I guess not. I mean, much of his family had died there. But he would never address things head on. Business-wise, strategy-wise, yes. But if it had anything to do with his emotions, he just didn't want to deal with it.
But how did he go back to work? Back to this place that killed his son?
Well, it was a terrible accident. But they didn't kill him. There was no intent. It must have been very, very hard. But eventually he did go back. It wouldn't have been right away, though. It would have been very hard. It was very hard. He tried his best.
7 weeks before I went back to Fort McMurray for the first time, a devastating wildfire consumed the region. I learned about the fire the same night that I learned my stepfather died. It was May 2nd last year. I watched both events unfold with sadness from a distance on a laptop screen in a Boston hotel. The images of the fire were harrowing. They evacuated the whole city, and people were driving through columns of flames, embers bouncing off the hood of the car, thick smoke. The traffic was moving so slowly. The fire chief, Darby Allen, became an instant hero, so stoic and compassionate.
We successfully evacuated 88,000 people. No one is hurt, no one has passed away right now. I really hope we can get to the end of this and we can still say that.
The news of my stepfather's death was simpler. My stepbrother sent us an email with the subject line, "Father is dead." The fire burned for weeks. When I got to Fort McMurray at the end of July, I thought the city would be like a burned out shell, but like any catastrophe, it was arbitrary. I mean, 6 houses in a cul-de-sac would be fine, and the 7th not. The fire was still going on out in the bush. It smoldered in the peat all through the winter. And it was business as usual. I mean, on television it looks like a disaster, and it is, but people are also living their lives. While the fire was still burning, there was this controversy in the media. These Old Testament images were irresistible. That op-ed in The Guardian calling the oil companies arsonists. I talked to my friend Cleo about the fire. Do you remember her? She's the one who organized the healing gathering. And when I went back last summer a second time, I stayed with her in her house on the reserve, and we come back to her place after this cutthroat Scrabble game with her 90-year-old mother. And there 3 of us were sitting around the kitchen table, and we realized that each one of us had lived through a recent disaster. The Slave Lake fire in 2011, Fort McMurray fire, and me with Sandy in 2012. And while we were talking, 200 fires were burning out of control in British Columbia. I remember taking Sheldon out to see the fire damage the day after we met. I said to him, you know, like growing up in Alberta, I used to think that like nature could kill you, right? But cities were safe. And now it's like the other way around. But you know, like this catastrophe kind of brings out the wonder in us. And like for a minute, we're all just walking around going, can you believe what's happening? We were pulled over by the side of the road. And Sheldon's climbing up on the fence to look at these black trees and the shell of this burned out car. And he comes down off the fence and he's got tears in his eyes.
I know fires happen all the time, but fuck me. Like, look at that guy driving a track with a 3,500 HP engine. He's probably just going for breakfast. He's putting half a pound of fucking carbon in the air. And the way we live is so perverse. And you know, you can't see it when you're in it. I used to talk that way about my addiction. No, I'm in it this time, no more, I'm fucking done, I've had it, and then boom. There I am, driving in my truck, hiding out in the bush somewhere, and what happened? What did I do? How did that happen? And I said that for many years, I can't see it when I'm in it. I can't see it when I'm in it. But we can. We choose not to. We fucking choose not to.
No, I talked to my friend, the engineer, about my stepbrother's death. Hey, so walk me through this. I mean, how would you analyze an event like this if it happened on your site?
Well, the first thing I want to know is if there were hydrocarbons in the pipeline. And if there was an explosion, it sounds like there would be. It would be important to know if the pipeline was operational, or if it was being built or moved or inspected. In terms of causes, I would likely look to pressure valves or the possibility of some sort of damage or corrosion. And if there was no liability to be found, I'll look to other areas, other causes, human error.
I mean, I wonder, what was it like for my stepfather to go back to work after this? I mean, there's got to be a part of you that just says, well, look, you know, shit happens.
No, shit doesn't happen. There's always a reason, and you have to get to the root causes in order to prevent things from happening again. Shit happens is not acceptable.
Well, maybe it's not acceptable, but we didn't have any choice but to accept it. Our Canadian icon, Margaret Atwood, wrote that the central theme of Canadian literature is survival.
Like the frontier for America, and the island for England. It is a multifaceted idea. Let us suppose, for the sake of argument, that Canada as a whole is a victim. Let us suppose, in short, that Canada is a colony. A partial definition of a colony is that it is a place which a profit is made, but not by the people who live there. If Canada is a collective victim, it should pay attention to the basic victim positions. These are like the basic positions in ballet, or the scales on the piano. They are primary, though all kinds of song and dance variations on them are possible.
Basic victim positions.
Position 1, to deny the fact that you are a victim.
Position 2, to acknowledge the fact that you are a victim, but explain that as an act of fate, the will of God, the necessity decreed by economics or any other large, general, powerful idea.
Position 3, to acknowledge the fact that you are a victim but refuse to accept the assumption that the role is inevitable.
Position 4, to be a creative non-victim.
What do we do after a disaster? When we were hurt, and we want to know why. But there's no clear place to point the finger, because the finger goes everywhere. I mean, it's like my friend says, if you like all this, you like oil. I have a theory that this is what those memes are about. You know, like Fort Mac Strong. You say you're a survivor, and you can claim your victimhood. And a victim is blameless. So you put a bumper sticker on your car, and you go on with the work of surviving. And that's hard enough. We have to go back to our lives. We have to go back to work. I mean, we work for all kinds of reasons. It's not just about the money. Do you know, we think about disasters as neutral events, but they're not really. They reveal what's really been going on all along. I mean, they're neither neutral nor natural. They're policy events. They're political events. They're moral events. But those stories only come out after the media has moved on. So what happens next? If we really want to know what's going on, that's where we should be looking. It's like Alice has been saying all along.
We have all these studies. We've been studied to death, and still nothing. And really, studied to death, meaning a lot of people have died, have paid the ultimate price, their lives. It's obvious that they don't think about those things, or they just don't care. Because once they've made their money and the last drop of oil is gone, they'll just pack up and go, and Fort Mac will become another uranium city, a ghost town. Infrastructures will all fall to pieces, and we'll have the tailings still leaking into the Athabasca River. It doesn't look good for all of us, and we all know it. I asked them, when you guys are done, are you going to take that pipeline out from under the river? No. So why would you leave it there? We don't want it. You put it there to make money, then you must have the money to take it out.
I'm still trying to wrap my head around what's happened in my hometown. I mean, it defies perception. And the oil sands seem to defy any borders we try to place on them. I mean, the government leases public land to oil companies, and the condition is that they return it to the people in what they call a pre-disturbance condition. And the oil companies submit a plan saying how they're going to do that, and that's what gets approved by the regulators. But it's all hypothetical, and nature doesn't work that way. I mean, you can't just put things back the way they were. Air pollution travels downwind. Waste seeps into the groundwater. And anyone can ask the obvious questions, like, what are they going to do with 1 trillion liters of toxic waste?
Will they be able to clean this up?
Who's going to pay for it?
And you put the same questions in the hands of politicians, regulators, and oil companies. These are the very people charged with the task of figuring all this out, and suddenly everything becomes very unclear. I mean, you have industry saying
the ponds aren't leaking.
And you have credible groups, and finally a few studies showing that that's not true. And you have industry saying
studies are flawed.
And
we're dealing with the toughest environmental standards in the world.
And on the other hand, you have the fact that there was no regulation at all on tailings management until 2009. I mean, industry was left to regulate itself. So there's a big gap between those two narratives. And you have people living in that gap. And those people are scared. And in the meanwhile, the waste keeps building up. Some of the mines are scheduled to close in the next 15 years. So what's going to happen then? It's like nobody is looking at the whole picture. Instead, it's like industry versus policymakers versus engineers versus media versus environmentalists. It's like the parable of the blind scientist, you know? They're trying to describe an elephant, and one guy has his hand on the trunk, and he says...
An elephant is a snake.
And another guy has his hand on the tusk, and he says...
An elephant is a spear.
And another guy has his hand on the leg, and he says...
Ooh, an elephant is a tree.
It's like nobody sees the whole animal. But the thing is, we're not blind. So I asked a research analyst, how did it get this bad?
The Alberta government has been aware of the problem since the early 1970s, and the attitude was always, in a few decades, we'll have the technology, we'll have the science, we'll have a silver bullet. Look how fast the world is changing. And that put us in the position we're in today, where we still don't have the technologies that work, or anything that's even close to a silver bullet. I mean, the situation today is very dire. I mean, there's an argument that's been used since the 1980s, and it's still being used today. Well, it's a tough time for industry. We can't afford it right now. But if these costs would have been internalized from the beginning and accounted for, would this huge industrial project of oil sands mining, would it ever even have been economically feasible?
Suncor is committed to responsible development of the oil sands resources, and addressing the tailings challenge is important to us as a company and to our stakeholders.
I think it's incredibly important to engage our shareholders in this conversation about tailings. One of the main reasons is the end goal. It's actually about returning the land to the people. The issue here is not whether or not we can restore the land or reclaim tailings. The whole issue is just how do we get better and faster at doing it.
Water capping technology is the best practice. As an oil sands industry, we've got more than 30 years of experience. We absolutely, solidly believe we'll be able to restore the land back to the original users so they can enjoy this and use this for the future and for all future generations.
Well, that's what Suncor says anyway. But the analysts and environmentalists suggest something different.
So you have all these companies proposing water-capped tailings. I mean, basically dealing with the tailings by putting them in the bottom of a mined-out pit and then covering them with water.
And you just put more water on top of them and walk away and hope that nature fixes it. But of course, we don't have any evidence to show that works.
Well, that's the thing with new technologies. Oil sands mining is a very young industry. I mean, other mining industries have a better understanding of how to deal with their waste.
We're creating this huge future environmental and financial liability for taxpayers.
Well, you have to look at the track record. In 2009, Suncor introduced its new tailings reduction technology with all of these wild promises. And you had the premier promising that the tailings would disappear in years, not decades. And obviously, that didn't pan out.
And now, I mean, there's really nothing stopping the oil companies from declaring bankruptcy and walking away from the whole mess. But people really don't want to see it. People see what they want to see.
Can everyone please share this video of reclamation? I'd love to get 1 million views.
Please send this to Jane Fonda, Leo DiCaprio, and the other celebrities that put their nose in our business. Tell them to shut the H up.
Way to go, Suncor! Proud of you!
Alberta is doing a good job. Beautiful reclamation.
So, Jane Fonda can suck it.
I'm standing by the shore of Crane Lake. It's Suncor's showcase for land reclamation. And the trail to get here is dotted with signs. There's a big sign at the entrance that says no diving, swimming, wading, fishing, for your safety. There's other signs where a toad named Drillbit tells you how Suncor is working with Mother Nature to put things back in place. And there's a billboard sponsored by Ducks Unlimited that tells you which ducks you might be seeing. And I think I saw a few ducks. I thought I saw a beaver in the other little pond. I was talking to my friend Sheldon about it. I said, you know how you can drive up to Syncrude's Buffalo Point Lookout? And you look out over these like rolling green hills of reclaimed land, right? But then you turn like 45 degrees to the right, and you see the tailings pond, and you see the upgrader plant with that smokestack just pushing that smoke out into the air like 24 hours a day, right? You turn another 45 degrees, and you see that big white desert of tailings sand, and those two dinosaurs of old trucks at the Giants of Mining exhibit. You know, it's like a theme park out there. It's like the land of Oz, right? I mean, last time I was there, this car pulls up, and these three young guys get out. This one guy comes up to me, and he's like, hey, have you seen the buffalo? Are they out? And I'm like, no, buddy, I'm sorry. Never seen him. And he says, yeah, me neither. And then he climbs up on this bench, and he's like peering over the horizon. And you know, I'm kind of like that guy too. Like, I want to believe that it's real. I want to believe that they're going to figure this out. Science is going to save us, you know? I mean, look, my mom was born in this cabin without like heat and running water. Look at me now, you know? But of course, as my Uncle Cecil used to always say, like, we got running water. You just got to run down to the creek, you know?
If people are given the option, you know, what would you rather do, Frank? Do you want to drive into the bush and strip the earth clean, squeeze the last remnants of fucking oil that we can get from this mud? Or would you like to build a life that promises a bright, sustainable future? You know, it's like, are you kidding me? What human being is going to answer the former, you know? Nobody. But, do you know, I think we spend time convincing ourselves that we need this. We have to. The powers that be make it seem like we don't have a choice.
Let's go back to Cleo's house and the conversation around the kitchen table. All right, so we've got Rex Tillerson, or someone just like him, right?
Oh, I think he should definitely be on the remediation cruise.
Oh, yeah, he's like in his suit, right? And he's like slopping up that oil with like human hair booms and like squeezing them out and reusing them and pushing them back in.
You could do what they do at Nexon. When they had that big oil spill and it went out on the muskeg and the fen, my brother Bob was working there, and they had to all don their protective gear and go in and physically clear out all the stuff.
They put it in there. Let them take it out, right? I mean, Jesus, it's smelly. You get the shit all over you. Like, give them a few years of that. Like, no summer vacation. And my conversations continued. Now back to Alice's porch in Fort Chip.
And why did they have to have the final say? I mean, this is our land. We never gave it up. Treaties have been broken. I would gladly have this treaty broken and force them out. I mean, the dirty oil came from things that were alive at one time. And now, you're using that to make money. It only causes death. And that's how I see it. But what's wrong with solar panels? It's free. You know, the wind, it's clean. And then there's the president dump. He'll say, oh, it's cold in here. Turn the thermostat up. Being a prick. God, Americans, you know? I'm so happy I'm a Canadian. I'm a Dene woman. I'm not so much Canadian. I'm a Dene woman.
When I was 14, I made a choice to become a professional musician because it had nothing to do with oil. I went to New York. And if this was a movie, this is where it would end, right? Me dancing around the Lincoln Center fountain like the opening sequence to Fame. I really thought it was going to be like that. But it's not a movie, and it didn't end there. You know, I graduated from Juilliard, and I went back to Alberta, and I actually gave up music for years. And so I was there in the 90s. That unbridled development was happening all around me. So why didn't I see it? I mean, there were many other things happening. There's the Berlin Wall, the internet, genocides in Rwanda, and Yugoslavia. But you know, Canadians, like, we're the good guys. We're humanitarians. We send peacekeepers overseas, but we don't want to see the genocide intrinsic to the very idea of Canada as a country. And then I moved to New York a second time. And then the images were in the news, the oily ducts, the tailings ponds. But maybe the images are part of the problem. I mean, they're useful because they command our attention. And for a minute, we can't look away. But we do have to look away because they overwhelm us. So we end up seeing what's in the picture, but not what's beyond the frame. And we think we see what's going on, but we don't really see things as they really are. You know, when I was 14, I decided that there were two kinds of people in the world. There were people who worked in oil, and there were people whose work would offer something else to the world. That's a pretty simple way of looking at things, and it's true. But maybe it's another way of not seeing. And I wanted to find people who really could see things as they really are.
When our ancestors reserved our fishing rights through the treaties, they didn't say that those are our fish. They reserved the right to fish, which meant they reserved the right to pray for the fish, to dance for the fish, to sing for the fish, to catch and eat the fish, to live with the fish, to have a relationship with the fish. That's what they were reserving. So we don't think of it as property, but as having a relationship to the natural world. The real treaty right is that relationship. And to me, that connection is what we need to protect. And what our society has often broken is that relationship to the natural world.
That's Frank Edwageshik. He's the executive director of the United Tribes of Michigan and the governing board chair of the United League of Indigenous Nations. I met him in Michigan last summer when I was traveling through the Upper Peninsula looking for people whose lives were connected to Alberta through pipelines. And Enbridge Line 5 carries Alberta crude right through Lake Superior. Now to get to Frank's house, you travel north into the UP through a light gray rain. You go turn off at the driveway with the no oil in our straight sign, and you stand in his kitchen, and you bond over your shared habit of collecting herbal tea bags from hotels and conferences. And you learn about all the ways he's working to develop people's relationships to the natural world. A dark sky park in Mackinac City, community-based energy cooperatives. And whenever he comes to the United Nations in New York, he makes a point of sitting for a few minutes in Central Park. And you know, Sheldon, what I got from Frank was this sense that we really do have more choices than we think.
My late mom was an Indian named Sunny Wachescu, means mountain woman. She was a guardian, a protectress of the wilderness. She was on the front lines with the native lands rights activists protesting treatment of Lubicon Cree back in the 70s and 80s, and that's very much a part of who I am, that movement, and it's still going on. But the whole story of my life, from 11 years old to now, is underpinned by the pall of addiction. Maybe younger than that. I think Chips Ahoy was my first addiction. But I was sitting in the truck one night and I was just struggling with the guilt and the shame of being an addict. The relationship that I damaged, the relationships with my children. I was hauling a full load, maybe 800 tons, and I'm crawling up this hill. It was about minus 30, 3 in the morning, and I came into the top of the dump site. I backed into position and dumped my load beside the cab. And I looked down at this vista before me, and it was surreal. It was a moonscape, you know? It was bleak and cold, and you had all these diesel fumes from all these trucks that were crawling over the earth like so many mechanical devil ants, you know? It just got me right in my core. I thought, what the hell happened? How did you get here, you know? You were the right hand of Mother Earth herself, and so sitting at the top of Mordor, overlooking this activity, all of us just ripping Mother Earth apart, I was overwhelmed, okay? So I paused my truck, and I turned down the mine radio, which was chatting incessantly. You know, all the foremen, everybody talking, just sitting there in silence and darkness, and I could feel this emotion welling. And then for some reason, I turned on my radio, my actual radio, and the first thing I heard was, that was my impression of a sound of a rattle. Sissequat. It's the rattle ceremony. And it was a recording of an elder in a sweat lodge. And here I am in my truck, 700 tons of steel, on the top of hell, overlooking this surreal scape of destruction and greed, and all of a sudden I'm transported into a sweat lodge. And instantly I felt the spirit of my late mother sitting in my passenger seat, which is about 25 feet away because the truck is built like a house. I looked over, literally on my passenger seat. I could see her sitting there laughing at me. Because, you know, she always laughed at me because I was a bit of a big baby and I would take things to heart but she was laughing because I realized that me, the me that is me, was still there. I melted down. I took my hard hat off and bawled like a baby, like a grown man decrying my existence and what I was doing for money. I like to say that was the moment I turned my life around, found the Creator, and walked the path of righteousness and love for all humanity. But it was just one poignant moment. But I did give my notice shortly thereafter.
It's about 8:15 in the morning on Tuesday, July 11th, and I'm on a gravel road. I think I'm still on Highway 63. I think I might be on the winter road to Fort Chip. But there's no signs, there's no one around. And I've stopped by the side of the road because I want to record some sounds. And I heard that bird that I love. You know, he's going dee dee bitty 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 dee 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 bitty 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 bitty. So I get out my shotgun mic and I've got my hand like up in the air, right? And I'm like honing in on the sound, like I'm listening, right? And as I'm listening, it seems to blossom. Like more and more birds are coming in. And at one point, it's just like a symphony of birds, right? And I'm thinking, man, these birds are grouping, right? And like, okay, so I keep the recorder going and I'm having all these fantasies about myself that, you know, here I have learned how to listen and nature is revealing herself to me. And I'm having this ecstatic sort of communion with Mother Nature, right? And I put my other hand up in the air and I've got both hands up, right? And it's raining and the mosquitoes are swarming around the microphone and nothing is bothering me. I'm saying, this is it. And I keep the recorder going. And after 10 minutes, I shut it off. And I go into my pocket and I take out my phone because I want to take a picture. And that's when it hit me. It was my alarm. It was the alarm with the bird sounds. It had been going since 8 a.m. That symphony was my phone. And there's got to be a moral in that somewhere.
What gives me hope is that I believe that right always comes out. And that the people that are insisting on doing things the wrong way, it will turn around on them.
That's Frank Edwageshik.
That's what I think. And people talk about that when an elder dies, it's like a library burning down. But what I know is that we're taught to ask, and then to listen, and to hope that we have the ability to understand what we hear. So if we need a medicine, and the elder isn't there to teach us where to get it, if we say our prayers, and we ask, and we think, and we go out and spend some time, more than likely we're going to be guided to what we need. Because that's how it was done in the first place. So that knowledge isn't lost. It's still there. So I am not in a dead panic about the loss of things. Some people, they worry about us, and they really want to capture everything we got to say. And so when one of us tells a story, they'll write it down, and it's frozen in time in that instant. What they don't understand is that the story is the interaction between the listener and the teller. And so the stories are alive. They don't really change, but they are also living. So they aren't ever exactly the same from one time to the next. And so the same thing is true with the knowledge of how to protect ourselves from things that are going on in the world. It doesn't mean that a natural disaster won't kill us. But we believe we have the resiliency within our cultures to survive it. And so I am less inclined to be depressed about what's going on. And at the same time, I'm working to make it as good as I can.
years, I told myself that to pursue a life as an artist was to choose to sacrifice a part of my past, you know? And I didn't look back, because looking back is for the people who've already arrived. But all of that time, I carried with me this invisible atlas of Alberta. The idea of north, the feeling of space, the texture of trees, the tone of the sky, the angle of light in the dusk driving north, the rough rapid fire of my uncle's voices, my granny's hands rolling dough for pierogies. And I thought I had to give all those things up. But I'm starting to tell a new story. And that bird is part of it. It's a white-throated sparrow. And they're born in the boreal forest of northern Canada. And get this, like me, they migrate to the east coast of the United States. But they go back every year. And I don't want to labor the point about the bird, but I think we need to keep going back and forth. So back to where we've come from, and to where we are now, and to the place we haven't even imagined yet. The other day, a friend of mine asked me, "So what's the moral of your story?" And I wish I had an answer. I don't think there is one answer. I think there's a billion answers. And the Red River Jig, so that's in the story too. Because a good fiddler is not the best fiddler or the fastest fiddler. A good fiddler is the one who moves your feet. It's the one who remembers enough of the tune to play it, and who cares enough to show up and keep playing. And the music lives in the relationship between the fiddler and the listener and the dancer, and in the memory of those times when those things come together. And the nice thing about a tune is that once you know it, you can play it anytime you want. You don't even have to remember the tune. You just have to remember that it's still there.